Let's talk about some movies. I'm Ryan Buehler, and welcome to episode 5 of the Beginner's Guide to Filmmaker podcast, where each month I pick a particular director, watch their entire filmography, then I create a crash course giving you an idea of who they are as a person, what kind of movies they make, and what to expect when watching one of their films. Then later on, I record a movie talk discussing my thoughts on all of their films. So, in hindsight, I should have done this month on Tim Burton due to Wednesday coming out, but I totally forgot about it. Plus, I wanted to take off next month of December to deal with the holiday stresses without throwing the whole research process for one of these episodes. So it kind of worked out because Avatar: The Way of the Water comes out December 16th, 2022. So I figured I would talk about one of the biggest names in cinema, James Cameron. Tim Burton will have to wait for another episode down the line. I definitely want to talk about his films though. Anyways, if you haven't heard of James Cameron, you definitely have seen at least one of his films. His filmography might be small compared to other directors of this magnitude, but he has made some of the most iconic films in history. Two being the highest grossing films of their time, Avatar and Titanic, both grossing over $2 billion at the box office. Oh, and yeah, after its most recent re-release, Avatar is back at the highest grossing film of all time, beating out Avengers Endgame, ranking in $2.92 billion, almost $3 billion, and Titanic is at $2.2 billion. So I think he knows what he's doing. But anyways, James Cameron has written and directed technically 9 films: Piranha 2: The Spawning, The Terminator, Aliens, The Abyss, Terminator 2: Judgment Day, True Lies, Titanic, Avatar, and Avatar: The Way of the Water. He has also directed a music video for Bill Paxton's band Martini Ranch, a short film titled Xenogenesis. He wrote First Blood Part 2, Strange Days, Alita Battle Angel, and Terminator Dark Fate. And has also directed 3 documentaries. So I'm going to guess that you have probably seen some of those films, but if you haven't, let's discuss a little bit more about Cameron himself. He was born in Ontario, Canada in 1954. He grew up near Niagara Falls, constantly hearing the crashing of the water. As a kid, he was fascinated by nature and science. He would wander around in the woods, exploring, searching for animals, and swam in a nearby creek. His fascination with nature and water would carry on throughout his life. His dad actually would drive him all the way to New York to take a special scuba diving course that was taught with military mentality. This would heavily impact his life. He was a really smart kid when he was growing up. He actually skipped a few grades. In his younger years, he was a big fan of movies. He'd go home and recreate scenes from the movies that he saw with what he had at home. One day, he came across a manual for a fallout shelter, and this was during the Cuban Missile Crisis in the early 60s. Cameron would become fascinated in science fiction and the post-apocalypse, stuffing his face with science fiction writing. But the thought of making films and the effects that made them wouldn't come until he watched 2001: A Space Odyssey, which he saw multiple times in theaters. He would begin to build spaceship models, which he would use this skill many times throughout his filming career. When he got older, he moved out west and worked many different jobs. He was a machinist, a truck driver, and a janitor. He'd work long shifts and then come home to write and paint. On the weekends, he would go to the library of a college nearby and read thesis papers by the students about filmmaking and visual effects. So instead of paying for film school, he would just photocopy the papers and taught himself how to make things. With the release of Star Wars in 1977, Cameron decided that he had to really pursue and make something of his own. With the help of friends and a group of dentists who wanted a tax write-off, he was able to get the funds and help to make a short film titled Xenogenesis that was released in 1978. They rented a camera and taught themselves how to use it. They built models and sets out of cardboard to create a 12-minute short. Now, watching it now is kind of rough. There's a moment where the audio actually cuts out for like multiple minutes. But you can definitely see the creative mind at work. Even as early as this, the designs for the models seem to eventually lead to some of the designs from Terminator and Aliens. Cameron would bring the film to Roger Corman, and he's a big name in Hollywood at the time. He kickstarted the careers of Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, and Ron Howard. He was looking for young blood to make movies for cheap. He just so happened to uncover some true geniuses. Cameron would make many friends with the people he worked with at Corman Studios, many he would later hire on his films throughout his career. Cameron brought his knowledge of filmmaking and introduced Corman to the front projection concept, and impressed Corman, who would make him his own art department. But Cameron and Corman would butt heads a lot, and Cameron was fired twice, but he was just too good at what he did, so he would always get hired back. His first film he worked on was titled Battle Beyond the Stars, that was released in 1980. It was Corman's way of cashing in on Star Wars. I watched the first half of the film, and it's just a rip-off of multiple movies. The music sounds just like John Williams' score from Star Wars, the sets look straight out of Star Trek, and the plot is taken from the Magnificent Seven, but in space. The movie is okay. I didn't make it through the whole film. It just feels weird that the budget and scale look straight from a 1960s episode of Star Trek but came out 20 years later. But the most important part about the film is it jump-started Cameron's career. He built the models for the film. The way he got the job is pretty funny. A bunch of designers were brought in to design the main spaceship for the movie, and whatever one was chosen by Corman got the job. Cameron decided to make the ship look like it had two boobs on the front. Corman saw it and immediately gave him the job. That was a pretty genius move by Cameron, and honestly, if I hadn't heard this before watching the film, I wouldn't have noticed, so it isn't, comically obvious. So it's probably not what you're picturing in your head right now. During this time, Cameron would meet a young, hungry artist that would become one of his best friends, and that was Bill Paxton. Paxton would help him with the painting of the sets for the film Battle Beyond the Stars. And Bill Paxton would appear in multiple of Cameron's films down the line. Cameron built the sets from just things he had around him. He painted egg cartons for walls. This is where Cameron makes a name for himself in the special effects industry and would lead him to landing his technically first directing job with Piranha 2: The Spawning in 1981, but we'll get to talk about his career in the movie talk section. Now let's talk about what kind of movies James Cameron makes. The types of movies he makes all carry along one particular theme. Humans cause their own destruction or are the real threat / create the threat. It's a very consistent theme throughout his filmography. You definitely can see it play out over and over again, but kind of different in the different situations that he presents us with. Also, he isn't a director who makes all very similar films. He's made many science fiction films, creating creatures, environments, and technologies, but he has also made romance and action films. But those science fiction films are often blended with other genres to keep it interesting. He blended genres with The Terminator and created the subgenre tech-noir, which is pretty impressive. Not too many people can claim to invent a subgenre. His films are also heavily character-driven. He creates interesting characters with real personalities. Keeping it entertaining, they pull you into the action and make you root for the characters. A big thing with Cameron, and he's famous for it, and that is his female characters. He's created some of the most iconic female characters, and he is one of those directors who can truly make a strong, badass female character. He's done it with Ripley in Aliens, Sarah Connor in T2, Nietri, Zoe Saldana's character in Avatar, Lindsay Bringman in The Abyss, and my personal favorite, Alita in Alita Battle Angel. And I almost forgot about Angela Bassett's character Mace in the movie Strange Days. I wish when a lot of movies try to have strong lead female characters, they would have done it like Cameron, or at least tried to be like his characters. His characters are interesting, believable, and just straight up badass. Even his other female characters are great, like Rose in Titanic or Jamie Lee Curtis in True Lies. I'll even say that Trisha O'Neill's character in Piranha 2 is well written. He is a very good director, but also a great writer. But he is also really good in another department, and that is the special effects and using the camera equipment themselves. You can expect a lot of models and practical effects in his earlier films in the 80s, and he just builds the technology required for his films. He helped design the scuba gear and the camera equipment for The Abyss. He worked to create the technology to create the CGI for T2, then eventually for Avatar. He literally helped invent motion capture headgear for CGI characters that all the big blockbuster movies like Marvel and Star Wars use constantly today. When it came to Titanic, Cameron did a lot of research and was very attention to detail with the film. He built a huge replica of the Titanic for the film. So he puts a lot of effort into his films. He isn't just a director. he's doing everything he can in all areas to make the film the best he possibly can. This might be the reason you might have heard of Cameron not being the best person to work with. He seems very hard on his crew, trying to get the best out of all of them, trying to make the film the best it can be under any circumstances. It doesn't seem he's as bad as Stanley Kubrick, though, but you can definitely hear how serious he takes his work when you watch some of the documentaries he's been in. If he doesn't agree with you, he's definitely going to tell you. On the other hand, he seems to be really nice while speaking in interviews, and he seems to be really nice off the set. So yeah, it's good to be serious when working, when work needs to be done, but it's not the easiest to work under. Anyways, another thing you can expect is to be watching something revolutionary for its time with most of his films. There is a reason why his films have won Oscars and become some of the highest grossing films of all time. The Terminator 2 special effects moment went on to help Industrial Light and Magic with Jurassic Park, and it inspired Peter Jackson when it came to the Lord of the Rings movies. All of this stuff going down the line, he is revolutionary. You can also expect the films to be really long. He tends to make over 2-hour-long movies, his shortest being 84 minutes, which is Piranha 2, and 108 minutes for the Terminator, but most of his films are 2 hours and above, Titanic being 3 hours and 14 minutes, and Avatar 2 is 3 hours and 10 minutes. So they're not really movies that you can just, at a whim, throw them on. You kind of need to be in the mood for a 3-hour movie, but most of his films are really good and worth sitting through, even with the super long runtimes. So hopefully that has given you a better idea of who James Cameron is and what to expect when putting on one of his films. Honestly, I wasn't super excited when getting ready to do the research for this episode. I realized Cameron was my first non-horror director, which might have been a reason why I wasn't as excited to hear his background on his films. I don't know why, though. But I can say he is really interesting, and I'm really glad I did do the research for this episode. It added a lot to my experience watching his films, understanding why he might have chosen to tell a story the way he did and where, because his life experiences can be seen as inspiration in a lot of his stuff, with his characters and environments. Just as an example, he has the climax of Terminator in a factory, which may have been due to cost, but he probably worked in a factory when he first moved out west. So it's a little thing like that which makes more sense after learning his story. So hopefully this makes you want to go watch one of his films or get excited for Avatar: The Way of the Water. But there is still a lot to discuss when it comes to his films, so I'm going to head over to the next section. Thanks for listening. Go check out the Movie Talk section when it comes out. I do still have 2 Movie Talk episodes to edit, Mike Flanagan's and Damian Leone's. I've just been running behind lately. I'm going to be taking next month off. And maybe sometime in January to sit down and finish editing those episodes, so they will be coming soon, so look out for them. But yeah, while you wait, you can go check out my other episodes that are up. Have 4 crash courses, now 5. But yeah, I will see you on the next episode. Have a good day.